inspect option is always there on all the elements in Chrome, and also it's there in Firefox. And this opens up something known as the Chrome inspector, okay, which has the HTML code. So this HTML code is nothing but it is this response from the server actually, and it is same for all the browsers. Okay, if you look at this HTML code in all the browsers for the website, it is the same. Fine. So there is this arrow over here. Fine. If you click on this arrow and move the mouse anywhere on the web page, you will get the HTML code corresponding to that particular element. Fine. Now in HTML, you have to understand that there are two things. One is that there is something known as the uh, tag. Okay, the whatever starts with a conical bracket is the tag. For example, h3 is a tag, div is a tag, li is a tag, section is a tag. So whatever is starting with a conical bracket, that is known as the tag. Fine. And a tag can have one or many attributes. Okay. For example, this is the li tag. It has got the attribute as class. Fine. H1 tag, it has an attribute known as an ID. Fine. A tag can have more than one attributes as well. Right. For example, this is a section tag over here. Let me switch this to the doc view. Okay, doc to bottom view. Yeah. So this is a section tag. It's got two attributes. One is the class attribute and other is this data WWHP attribute. Okay. So this division over here has got one, two, three, four attributes: ID, role, class, and data WWHP. Okay. So with the help of these tags and these attributes, we go and identify the elements on the web page. All right. So gradually this will be clear to you. Fine. As we gradually proceed with the course. All right. Even if I open another browser, Mozilla, if I run the code, hold on, let the browser open. Yeah. On say Mozilla as well, if I visit the website bbc.com, then the page source which I was inspecting, fine, it will remain the same. Okay, the page source will not change. The page source remains across all the browsers. Fine. On Mozilla also, if you right click, you will get the option to inspect the element. So this inspect option will again open the same kind of inspector. It is the Mozilla inspector right now. Okay, but what I prefer is that I prefer using Chrome inspector. It's quite fast and the the page source is same, so it doesn't matter. Fine. Now, how do you use this page source to identify the elements? Okay, for that, I'll just hold on. Just a minute. I'll just make a very simple Excel file. elements. Fine. And guys, are you hearing some background noise or is it fine?
Fine.
Okay, if you hear some background noise, just let me know. I'll change my location. Fine. So because I'm sitting somewhere else today. Okay, generally I sit in a closed room. Fine. So over here, there are three things. One is what type of element it is there on the web page. Fine. And uh, what is the tag of that element, the tag name, mandatory attributes. Now there are some attributes which are always mandatory, which will always be present with the element, and there are some attributes which are optional attributes, which will be which might be present or might not be present with the element. Okay, so like for example, this is a div tag. This div tag has got four attributes. So some of the attributes might be mandatory and some of the attributes might be, you know, uh, optional. Fine. So an element like, for example, I talk about a text box or I talk about a radio button or a checkbox on the web page. Fine. Or a button on a web page. Text field, link, image, drop down, and the regular text which is written on the web pages. So generally we have got elements like these. Fine. So if you talk about a text box, okay, say this is a search text box on the top right side on this web page. Fine. If you look at the search checkbox, sorry, text box. Okay, I should remove this text field over here. It's repeated here. So if I look at this text box, it's got the tag name as input. For a text box, the tag name will always be input. In any case, on any web page, if you go to any website, fine. If you go to any website, the tag name or the text field, for example, the username text field is over here. Fine. The tag name will always be input. Fine. If you talk about a checkbox, for example, this is a checkbox. For a checkbox also, you have that same tag name input. And for radio button also, the tag name is input. Okay. In case of a button on a web page, say this is the sign in button. For a button also, the tag name is input. Or sometimes it is also a button. So if a button, checkbox, radio button, text box, all of them have the same tag name, then how do we differentiate between them in the code? Okay, the difference is that in case of a text field, there is always a mandatory attribute whose value is text. If the tag name is input and type becomes text, it becomes a text field. Okay, so you write over here text. In case of a checkbox, okay, this is a checkbox. The type attribute becomes equals to checkbox. Type attribute varies in case of text box, radio button. Okay, why am I teaching you these things? This is important because this is how Selenium identifies the elements on the web page. Okay, and it becomes type becomes equal to checkbox in case of a checkbox, and in case of a radio button, the type is always radio. In case of an input type button or a button tag is there, right? You will have the type attribute as submit. In case of a button, the type attribute is initialized as submit. All right. If you talk about a link on a web page, say for example, forgot password is a link. Okay, in case of a link, the tag name is always anchor tag. You can take any link on the web page. It will always lie inside the anchor tag A. Many of you must be knowing about this. Okay, and href is the mandatory attribute in every link. An href attribute holds the URL which will open when you click on the link or interact with the link. Okay, so href attribute holds the URL which will open when you click on the link. Okay, then you have the image tag. Okay, like for example, this is the rediff mail image. Fine. Okay, this is not coming up. At times, if you talk about pure images, yeah, image will like this is an image. Image will always have the attribute img. Sorry, the tag name img, and it will always have the attribute source, which will hold the URL from which the image is loading. Fine. Say, for example, if I copy this source attribute, paste it here, so this will open the image. Fine. So the image attribute or the image tag represents img tag, it represents the image, and this image has the mandatory attribute source. Okay, a drop down. A drop down, say you go to my website. A drop down like this. This has got the different country names. A drop down will always have the tag name as select. Okay, select tag will always be there, and there is no mandatory attribute. Okay, in a drop down, there is no mandatory attribute, and in case of a text, you cannot specify the tag name. Sometimes text is present in div tag, sometimes in span tag, sometimes heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 like this. So you don't have any particular specific tag for the text of the web page, but a text will always be present in certain tag. Okay, and each of these elements have some optional attributes. Optional attributes like ID name, class. These are the optional attributes. That is, they might or might not be present on the element. But if they are present on the element, then it becomes easy to identify the element, especially if you have an ID or a name associated with the element. Fine. How this thing it uh, makes your work easy is basically, you know, I'll tell you. Just a minute. Let me go to the official website. of Selenium. Go to the downloads page and open the API documentation. Now, if you scroll down, you will see a class name as simple name by class. Okay, this is a very important class. It has got the mechanisms used to locate the elements within a document. Okay, basically, it has got the ways with which you can find the elements on a web page. Many of you must have studied this and must be knowing this, right? For example, if I tell you some task to do, okay. So, for example, if I tell you that go and order a shirt online. So there are different ways in which you can do that. Fine. Similarly, in Selenium also, there are different ways with which you can interact with the elements on the web page and extract them. There are different mechanisms. Fine. And mechanisms like by the class name, by the CSS selector, okay, or by the ID, by the link text, by the name. Fine. So these mechanisms are really quite and you get so many mechanisms with which you can interact or extract the elements on the web page. And every mechanism is static. Now, what do I mean by static? Right. Let me just make a new Java project. Okay. Look, learning these things, learning Selenium and whatever I'm teaching you right now, this is very easy. Even if you are not able to grasp right now, maybe after the class you can give yourself some time and you can easily learn these things. Okay. But the problem, I'll tell you, the problem comes up when you have to do projects. Okay, you have an end-to-end project which has to be implemented. So the real challenge is in that because over there, this is just one part of that project, identifying the elements. There are lots of other things as well. Okay, so gradually we'll study everything, right? I'll just make a new class known as finding elements. Now there is a class known as by dot. This class has got the mechanisms with which you can find the elements on the web page. Like you want to find the element by the ID, by the CSS selector, by the link text, by the name, partial link text, tag name, XPath. So these might look little new to you, but the easiest one of them is ID. You specify the ID of this element on the web page and you can identify it. But how do I do that? What kind of code do I write? Fine. So in day 3, I had made this dynamic browsers. I am just going to copy the code from it, write it over here. So suppose I open the Chrome browser and I move to this web page. Like for example, you have to fill up the form. So if you inspect the name field over here, the name has an ID. So if an element is having an ID, it is really lucky because IDs are generally unique. Generally, two elements on the web page don't have the same ID. Fine. So you specify over here, that is after going to say this particular URL. you can write driver dot find element. Now driver dot find element will go and find the element on the web page with a certain criteria. This command finds the element with a certain criteria. The criteria is specified by the by class. You can write by.id and you can specify the ID over here like this. Right. So driver dot find element by the ID this, and this thing, this whole thing, this command returns you the object reference of another interface known as web element. It calculates it and returns you back. If you look at the documentation, there is another interface known as the web element interface. Fine. The interface web element, it basically represents a certain HTML element on the web page. Fine. For example, a button. A button is a web element. Everything, okay, everything which we just discussed, okay, over here, all these elements fall under the category of web element. Okay, a text box is a web element, a radio button is a web element. So everything which we discussed right now is a web element. Fine. And this interface web element has got commands, or you can say it has got features which will help you to interact with the web elements. Fine. So out here, for example, you have the function. So you can click on the element, or you have the function like get location. This will give you the location of the element. Get the text out of the element. Is the element displayed? Is the element enabled? So this web element has got different functions which help you interact with the elements on the web page. Okay. So in this case, you go and find the element with the ID. So I'm talking about the ID attribute first. If the element has the ID attribute, it is the easiest one, and I can write web element username is this. So this command returns you the reference of this web element interface. And what do you want to do with the username? Fine. You can write over here username dot send keys. Send keys function is used to type inside an element. Okay, you can check out the documentation as well. So you have the send keys function. Use this method to simulate typing into an element which may set its value. Right. So this is how you interact. Okay, if I elaborate this, then this whole code can be distributed in three lines. First is the criteria. Okay, by ID, by name. This returns you the reference of the by class only. Then you find the element by that particular criteria. Okay, you first decide the criteria, then you find the element, and then you interact with it. Okay, so if you hold on, so you will see that, see, it's typed XYZ over here. Fine. Now, if I run the same code in some other browser, it's going to work because the page source, it remains the same across different browsers. So whether it is Chrome or Mozilla, the ID of the element will not change. This is the predefined ID. Okay, so you can write the code in one browser for one browser and you can run it for the other browsers as well. Okay, so if you run this, you see that. Okay, now this is once this is done, guys, I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm sitting somewhere else today. Okay, so yeah, so over here you are typing something inside the text field. Right. Now to interact with one element, I'm writing three lines of code. Okay. For example, over here on this web page, I'm writing name. So I'm writing three lines of code. So instead of doing three lines, you can write everything in one line. You can write simply driver.find element and you can give the criteria over here. Fine. That is driver.find element by the ID dot send keys. Okay, so you can type whatever you want to type over here. Basically, the initial part over here is going to find the element on the web page. Okay, and the executions happens from the left to the right side. So first the element is found and then the interaction with the element is done. But you need to understand one basic thing that this whole one line is having three operations. It decides the criteria with which the element has to be extracted, it finds the element, and it interacts with the web page as well. Now, what if there are two elements on the web page with same ID? Generally, this should not happen. If it happens, then it is the mistake of the developer. Okay. Generally, in mobile apps, I've observed when you use Appium tool to automate mobile apps, you get this problem. Okay, in this problem, Selenium doesn't throw an error. Look, basically, how Selenium works is that it extracts the web page from the left side of the browser to the right side like this, and it goes down the web page. Okay, so if you have got two elements, one element is over here and the other one is over here, then Selenium will use the first one. Okay, so Selenium uses the first element. Okay, and it ignores the second element. All right, so if both of them have the same ID, first one will be used. How will we use the second one? Suppose if I want to use the second one, then that I'll talk about later on. That how do you use the second web element? Okay, now once this is done, you can further move. Okay, for example, on this particular web page only, say this is the submit query. Fine. If you have to click on it, if you have to click on it, right, this is a button whose type is this and class is this. So there is no ID over here. There is, so how do you interact with this element? Fine. Had there been an ID, then I would have written the command that is driver.find element by the ID dot click. The click command, it simply it's clicking on the element, but I don't have an ID over here. So if you don't have an ID, you look out for another attribute known as the name attribute. For example, if you look at the email field, okay, email field has got the name email. Fine. So the name email over here, the name attribute email is also considered to be unique, right? So if you write driver dot find element by the name this dot send keys, you type something inside this text field. So this is also uh, good, and this is also something which is uh, encouraged, that you can use ID or name to identify the attribute. These are 99.99% of the times these are considered to be unique. But every time you want an ID or a name with an element. Okay, every element never has that. Okay, see it, the script again runs in Mozilla and it goes and types both the things. Fine. So every element will not have an ID or a name. That is not possible. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you interact with such elements? Like I just we just saw that this is the submit query button and the tag name is button. Fine. Okay. So out here there is no ID or okay. So in this case, we have got other identifying mechanisms. Mechanisms like we have got XPaths, CSS selectors. Okay, so I will talk about these, but before I talk about these, there are some important things which we need to fix. Okay, now sometimes, when you launch the browser, hold on. See, Mozilla, when it launches, you see it is in the maximized way. It launches in the maximum manner. If you look at when it is launching the script, when the Chrome browser starts, with observe, it is not in the maximized fashion. Right, so Chrome is in format. So you don't want this. Okay, you want that when your browser should start, the browser should be maximized. Right. Now, at times you get blockers, you get notifications in the website. Notifications like this, for example, if I write browser notification example, I'm sorry for the background noise, guys, just for today. Okay, just a minute. Yeah, notifications like these. Now, these, if they come up, it just blocks your access. You will not be able to do anything on the web page with Selenium. So you have to get rid of. Okay. Now, when the notification comes up on the web page, generally you want to block it or something when you're working with the script. Right. And how do you do that? Because you cannot just write simple command driver dot find element to interact with the notification. All right. Because that's not the part of the browser. That small pop-up is not the part of the browser. Okay, at times you have to work with proxy or SSL certificates. Okay, you have to accept the SSL certificates. So how do you do that? Okay, to do that, you have to first understand the concept of constructors in Java language. You have to initialize your browser in such a way that it is uh, compliant with the notifications, it is maximized, it can work with proxy or the SSL. Fine. So let me just go back to Java for some time. Okay, you need to understand two things over here. One is the concept of constructors, and other is the concept of simple inheritance in Java. In order for us to move forward. Okay, because I just don't want to jump over to the other mechanisms without teaching you these things. Fine. So let me go back to Java now, and I will I'll create a new class. Fine. And a simple class like laptop. Fine. In the laptop class, like we have variables in like we have got string name of the laptop. Okay. Int the RAM size of the laptop. Okay. String the company of the laptop. Okay. And say int hard disk capacity of the laptop. So if I create the object of this class, the laptop class, if I create another class known as test.java, in which I go and create object of the laptop class. I write over here laptop L equals to new laptop. Okay, so if I create the object, then I will have to initialize this object, right? I will have to write L1 dot name is Sony X series. L1 dot company is Sony, right? L1 dot RAM is 8 GB. L1 dot hard disk capacity is say 500. So I initialize this whole object. Fine. Okay. Now, if I create another object of this class, I will have to write L2 dot name is say Lenovo ThinkPad. L2 dot company is Lenovo. Right. So I will have to initialize each and every parameter of the laptop like this. I will have to initialize each and every attribute of the laptop like this. So this is quite tiresome thing because if I create 10 objects, I will have to write 4 lines to initialize it. And what if the laptop class had got not just 4 attributes, it would had got say 50 or even 10, then every object would have to be initialized like this. It is not a problem. You can do that, but there can be an easier way, and that easier way is through constructors. Okay, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a constructor of this class. Okay, you write public laptop So this is the constructor of the laptop class. Then the name of the constructor is also the name of the class. Okay, the class name and the constructor name is always same. It looks like a function, but it's not a function. There is no return. And this is known as the default constructor. By default, because it's got no arguments, and even if it is not there, it is always called. It is hidden on the web page. Okay, if I print inside it, creating or initializing laptop. Okay, when you run this code, it will print initializing laptop 2 times. Whenever you create the object of the laptop class, the constructor is called the default constructor. So if I write new laptop 3 times, over here I've got 3 more objects created, then the constructor would automatically be called. So a constructor is something which is called when the object of the class is created. Basically, this is the golden thing, that a constructor will be called when the object of the class is created. We can have one more constructor. We can have one more constructor, for example, public laptop. And in this constructor, we can pass the name, RAM, hard disk capacity, and the company name like this. So this basically means that when you create the object of the laptop, L3 I'll call it, you pass the name, okay, the RAM, the hard disk, and the company name. So when you write this way, the other constructor which accepts the 4 parameters will be mapped to this particular line. So that will be called automatically. Fine. Over here you can initialize the parameters. Okay, that is name equals to N, RAM equals to R, HD capacity is equal to H, and company equals to C. So the advantage is that when you create the object of the notebook, or sorry, the laptop class, you initialize the object on the fly. Okay, right. Similarly, you can write over here L4 and you can maybe have a different laptop. If you print L3 dot say company, or you print L3 dot name, and if you run this, so it's going to print both of them. Right. So a constructor is something which initializes the object. The major role of a constructor is to initialize the object. No logics have to be written in this. At times I have seen people writing for loops and other business logics inside this constructor. No, nothing, no if statement, nothing. Simply initialize the object. That's it. Okay. Now, generally what happens is that the parameter names over here, RAM, HD, and the company name. Generally what happens is the parameters which we give over here, we end up giving the names, defining them with the same names. This is also name, this is also name. This is also RAM, this is also RAM. And we want to initialize name equals to name, RAM equals to RAM, HD capacity equals to HD capacity, and company equals to company. Okay, so by saying this, on the left hand side name, we mean the global name. On the right hand side name, we mean the local parameter name. Okay, if you run this and print the company and the name over here, it's going to print null, that is nothing has been initialized. Okay, so basically if the name of this local variable is same as the name of this global variable, then the global variable hides. So if you want to refer the global variable, you have to use a keyword known as this dot name, this dot ram, this dot hd, and this. It's very simple. If you are putting this in front of any variable, it basically means the global variable. The variable of this particular object is equal to the local variable name. All right. So this attribute always, or this keyword, not the attribute, this keyword, it always points towards the global variable. Okay. So now if I run this, so this happens. It's working correctly. Right. So basically this attribute is quite important. It refers to the current object and the parameters of the current object. Okay, right. And you have got two constructors of the laptop class over here. One constructor is not receiving anything. The other constructor is receiving four parameters. You can have one more constructor. Maybe in that constructor, you just take in the name of the laptop. If you just want to initialize the object with the name, so you can write this dot name equals to name. All right. So you can have different forms of this constructor, and this is concept is known as overloading. That is one constructor, but there are different forms of that constructor. Okay, one can have no parameters, other one can have one parameter, the third one can have say four parameters. So this is technically known as constructor overloading. Now, how are constructors helpful to us? Right. For example, I am initializing Chrome driver over here. Now, Chrome driver object I am initializing with a default constructor. Okay. Now there is a class known as Chrome options. You create the object of that particular class and you can send the object in the constructor. And the work of constructor is to initialize stuff. Okay, so it will initialize the driver with the options which I can set. Okay, right. For example, I can write options dot add arguments. Fine. You can set in the options that fine, I want to start Chrome in a maximized manner. I want to disable the notifications. Fine. I am not remembering the commands to do that because I also copy paste every time. Okay, I'm sorry. Like, hold on. Chrome driver Selenium start. You will get the commands on the internet. Okay, so yes, this is the command to start the driver in a maximized manner. Start maximized. Then you can write options dot, or let me just run this with Chrome. So you create the object of Chrome options and start the browser in a maximized fashion. You see, Chrome now when it opens, the default browser is maximized. Fine. Similarly, you can disable the notifications. Options dot add argument double hyphen disable. I think this was the command notifications. I'll confirm this. Okay, give me a minute because I also always copy paste the code. Okay, I don't just write this again and again. Disable notifications. Yes, this is the command. Fine. So you can disable the notifications on the browser like this. It is very important. Small thing, but it can make your work stop. All right. So when you run this code, it will open the Chrome in maximized manner. It will disable the notifications. So you have got Chrome options class to do this. Similarly, you have got Firefox options and Edge options. You can do a lot of things. You can set the proxy, you can set the SSL certificates. There are standard commands. Okay. I don't say that you have to do this every time. Okay, but every time at least start the browser maximized with notifications disabled and all. That's going to help you. Okay, basically, if you go to the website qtpselenium.com and if you go to the Selenium training section, you will see that this section. Yeah, over here, if you watch this video, in this video, I have discussed in detail about browser logs, proxy settings, SSL errors, notifications in the browsers. Okay, the same way, I'm not going to tell you about these things further. You can watch that video. Okay, because these are standard commands, but at least I needed this much to kickstart my Chrome browser. So I use the constructor of the Chrome driver class over here. The constructor accepts the Chrome options argument. Okay, and it launches the browser with those particular options. Fine. Now the next thing is understanding inheritance.
Ashish, before we proceed, I have a question. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, how a system will come to know like which constructor to call? Because, as you said, like there are four constructors. One is the default one, and another three we have created. So, how the system will identify like which constructor to call at a time?
When, for example, you create the laptop object with no argument, it will call the default one. When you create the laptop object with four arguments, it will call the one which has got four arguments.
Okay, so that we have to specify.
Yeah, the number of arguments you are specifying corresponding to that the constructor is
Okay.
okay.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So over here I have used the constructor with which accepts the Chrome options as the argument, right? So we will today, okay, and we'll tomorrow. All right. So you'll get the invite and I will mail you the recording as well. Okay. So anyone with any questions, anything? Anything.
So I have a question. Does the client use Internet Explorer or Chrome for testing?
Uh, Very few people use IE these days. Generally, the requirements are on these three browsers. Very few clients use this thing. Okay.
Ashish,
Mm.
yeah, I have another question. Like, I'm not able to understand, like, how the constructors are helpful to us, as you mentioned, like, it will initialize the object.
It
But
initializes
it,
the object. Over here, you see, I am creating the Chrome driver object. Okay. I created the object of Chrome options in which I specifically mentioned that these are the options with which I want to start the Chrome. So I simply send the object options in the Chrome driver class and initialized it simply. Okay. So whichever driver opens, Chrome browser opens, will open with these particular options. You can add more options over here for SSL, for notifications, for proxy. Okay. Are you getting my point?
yes,
Okay.
I'll see that again.
Yeah, you when you do it yourself, you'll come to know. So this is the constructor. There is a constructor in Chrome driver which accepts these options object. Like there was a constructor in laptop which was accepting these four options. In Chrome driver, there is a constructor which accepts one option. Chrome options class object. Okay, so fine then, right? We'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.